So I know a lot of people are focused on the fraud coming out of Minnesota right now. And like always, both sides are doing their best to try to spin the story into their narrative. Some people are using it to confirm what they already believe. Others are rushing to dismiss it entirely. That back and forth creates a lot of noise, but very little understanding. So instead of arguing politics and headlines, I want to step back and talk about something very few people ever get to hear: the history of Somalia. How it became a failed state, how clans replaced the government, and why things like fraud, remittances, and groups like Al-Shabaab even exist inside that system. This is not a politically motivated video. I'm not trying to defend anyone or accuse anyone. My goal is to provide an unbiased ground truth explanation from somebody who spent a significant amount of their career on the ground dealing with Somalia directly. If you do not understand how Somalia actually functions, it is very easy to misinterpret these stories, like the ones coming out of Minnesota that project intent where there may be none, or miss real problems that do exist. This video is about context and not confirmation bias. I spent a significant portion of my career in special operations in Africa, including multiple missions in and around Somalia. What I'm sharing here is not theory or headlines. It is what I observed on the ground combined with historical context. Somalia was not always a failed state. After independence in 1960, it had a government and a strong sense of national identity, very far from what we see today. That began to change after a military coup in 1969 led by Siad Barre. His regime centralized power and publicly downplayed clan identity while favoring certain other clans, and relied heavily on Cold War support. When the Cold War ended, that external backing dried up. In 1991, that regime collapsed, and when it did, the Somalia state didn't weaken, it vanished. And then Somalia lost its army, police, banking system, and national identity almost overnight. There was no monopoly on violence, no consistent enforcement of law, no institution that people could rely on. And when that happens, people don't suddenly become criminals. They fall back on what they trust. And in Somalia, that was the clan. Clans are not criminal organizations by nature. They are extended family systems that provide security, justice, and survival when no state exists. They resolve disputes, provide protection, and ensure food and resources are moved where they're needed to. The downside is that clans only answer to themselves and not to a nation. Loyalty becomes local, power fragments, and accountability disappears. And unfortunately, once that happens, informal economies and armed power brokers only become inevitable. Quick side note, because people ask fairly often, this is barbell apparel. I wear it because it fits my athletic build, and I don't have to think about it. It's basically my daily uniform. I've got my barbell apparel link, discount code Stoic Viking 25 in the description below. Tell them that Stoic Viking sent you. Early on, piracy emerged along the Somalia coast, not as ideology, but as opportunism. Illegal fishing, toxic dumping, and zero maritime enforcement created an opening. And when the ransom money started flowing, the piracy scaled quickly. And later, when the international navies finally shut the piracy down, the networks didn't disappear, they adapted. Fraud and scamming required way less infrastructure, carried less local risk, and paid well. One individual abroad could support dozens of his people at home. Over time, this behavior became normalized, not celebrated, but tolerated. There is a difference. And during these recent news stories, you probably heard the words remittances and clan obligations. It is true, a massive portion of Somalia's economy is sent home from abroad. Some of it is legitimate, some of it isn't. On the ground, what mattered far more was not the source of the money, but whether the family survived. Clan responsibility meant the money did not belong to individuals. It belonged to the group, and that obligation shaped behavior for generations. And this is where Al-Shabaab enters the picture. Al-Shabaab has existed in its current form for roughly 20 years. It evolved out of the local Islamic courts that initially provided order when the state collapsed. And then it radicalized following foreign intervention in the mid-2000s. Al-Shabaab is not actually Somali culture. It is an insurgent organization that learned how to exist inside a failed state. One of the biggest misunderstandings that outsiders have is they think that Al-Shabaab and the clans are ideologically aligned. In reality, most of these relationships are transactional and coerced. Al-Shabaab operates like a shadow state. It taxes commerce, enforces contracts, punishes defiance, and uses violence predictably. And unfortunately, for many locals, predictable brutality feels safer than total chaos. And then for some, compliance becomes a survival decision and not an ideological one. And you're probably wondering why remittance money gets accused. Money sent back Somalia is often accused as funding Al-Shabaab, not because families support the group, because Al-Shabaab taxes the money that comes into their areas of influence, much like the mafia and the mob. Informal financial systems mean the money mixes immediately, and once it arrives, the sender no longer controls what happens next to it. And refusing to pay organizations like Al-Shabaab can result in beatings, kidnappings, and assassinations, or even just collective punishment. Compliance is survival, not endorsement. So, where does fraud and insurgency overlap? Fraud money, smuggling money, and even legitimate remittances all enter the same pipeline. And once inside Somalia, the origin matters far less than the obligation to share and the ability of the armed groups like Al Shabaab to extract it. Al Shabaab taxes outcomes, not intent. And that is why separating criminal finance and insurgent finance can be so difficult. And then there comes what I actually saw on the ground. What I did not see was the widespread ideological commitment to the jihad. And yeah, there was some, but it's honestly was not as widespread as most people think it is. What I saw were people navigating between clans, criminals, warlords, and extremists trying to survive in a system with no safety net. I also saw honor, hospitality, loyalty, and people who even risked their lives to help us. Somalia is not one thing. It is multiple realities overlapping in the same place. From a special operations perspective, Somalia is a masterclass in human terrain. Unlike other places, you are not dealing with ideology first. You are dealing with incentives, pressure, loyalties, and survival. As we have learned countless times before, you cannot defeat an insurgency purely militarily if it has replaced the state's ability to enforce rules and protect the people. If this video added value, liking and subscribing it helps to reach the right people. If you want to support the channel further, membership keeps this kind of content going. This video is not about telling you what to think. It's about giving you enough context to think clearly, without politics or confirmation bias. And unfortunately, often the ground truth is very uncomfortable, but it is where real understanding starts.